الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان وهدى إلى يوم الدين. Alhamdulillah, in our sessions on Allah's names explained, we've reached the divine name Al-Razzaq, the provider. In the previous lesson, we looked at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the gifter or the giver, right? Al-Wahhab, and Al-Wahhab is the one who gives without cause, right? That there is no reason underlying that giving. And the relationship between the various divine names is evident, right? They're mentioned in an order, and there's relationships between them. And because the giver is the one who has overwhelming control. The name that we looked at before the giver is Al-Qahhar, the overwhelming, who has absolute control over all things. So today we're looking at the divine name Al-Razzaq, the provider. And like the other names that we're looking at, this is mentioned in a number of places in the Qur'an. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He mentions these divine names, He links them to our turning to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the 40th surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of His great blessings, mentioning that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has made the earth a resting place for you. Allahu alladhi ja'ala lakum al-arda qarara was-samaa'a binaa'a, and the sky a canopy. وَصَوَّرَكُمْ فَأَحْسَنَ صُوَرَكُمْ, and He has formed you and made your forms beautiful, or formed you so well. وَرَزَقَكُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ, and provided for you sustenance of the good. And the طيبات, all that is good. ذَلِكُمُ اللَّهُ رَبُّكُمْ, that is Allah. Such is Allah, your Lord, right? Your Lord or your sustainer. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. So exalted then is Allah, the Lord of the worlds, or the sustainer of the worlds. Because the Lord, the Rabb, is the master, the one who's in charge of something, and it also refers to the one who sustains something, and who has concern for something. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us of a number of His blessings, and these are all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's providing, right? وَرَزَقَكُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ, and He has provided for you sustenance from all that is good, right? And what is the response to that? Realization that Allah is the provider of all that is good. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ, right? So hallowed then is Allah. Exalted is Allah, blessed is Allah, the Lord of the worlds. So what does this divine name mean? Al-Razzaq. Imam Al-Ghazali gives an explanation of who Al-Razzaq, the provider, is. That huwa alladhi خلق الأرزاق, right? That He is the one who has created provision, right? And those provided for, and He has conveyed provision to them. So He creates provision and those provided, and He is the one who conveys that provision to those He provides for, right? وَخَلَقَ لَهُمْ أَسْبَابَ التَّمَتُّعِ بِهَا, and He's also created the means whereby they may enjoy and benefit from those blessings. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not simply create the blessings. He created food for us, for example, but He's also created the ways for us to not just benefit from them, but to enjoy those blessings. He has created for us air to breathe, but He's given us the capacity by which to benefit from it and to enjoy that. And so on. Right? So Allah is the creator, the provider is the one who created all provision. And those who are provided for, and He is the one who conveys the provision to them. Right? Allah is the creator of both cause and effect, as we know. And so He's created both provision and those provided. And it's not when we seek rizq, when we seek provision, whether material or spiritual, we seek it, but we don't attain it. It is Allah who provides it. Right? And that's the adab of seeking. That one seeks, but we know that Allah gives. Right? So the seeker is always in neediness. And they realize that it is Allah who gives. Right? And then He's given us the capacity to enjoy it, so we appreciate Allah's blessings and celebrate them. Imam Zarruq gives a similar but distinct definition. Imam Ahmad Zarruq, in his commentary on the 99 names, he says that Al-Razzaq huwa mumiddu kulli ka'in. Right? The provider is the one who sustains all existent things. بما تحتفظ به صورته ومادته, with that which preserves its form and its substance. Right? So the Razzaq is the one who sustains, and the provider is the one who sustains, and imdad is the assistance that is conveyed, that supports something. Right? So the one who maintains, sustains, and supports all existent things. Right? Right? So Allah is the provider, is the one who's sustaining, and the reality of creation is that it is sustained. It is sustained. Right? Min ayn al-jud, right? From pure generosity. Right? And then what is this provision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives? We think of provision in very narrow ways. Right? Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, says that provision is of two types. وَالرِّزْقُ رِزْقَانِ رِزْقٌ ظَاهِرٌ, right? There is outward provision, right? Which he says is the one's sustenance and food, right? And that is for one's outward, right? That is the sustenance of bodies, right? But the sustaining, the rizq, right? The first thing that he provides for you is your life itself. Your life is provided for you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the provision relates more to that which it refers to, that which is given to the one He has gifted with the gift of life, right? That He's given the gift of life, and then having given the gift of life, then He provides for it. Right? Then He provides, right, all that will keep the form and substance of everything that He has created. So there's the provision of the outward through food and nourishment and all other types of material support, having a job and earnings and wealth and housing and all, the air that we breathe in, all these material things, personal and surrounding us. This is from the rizq al-zahir. But then there's also, he says, وَرِزْقٌ بَاطِنٌ, and then there's the inward provision, which is وَهِيَ الْمَعَارِفُ وَالْمُكَاشَفَاتِ, right? And that is spiritual knowledges and unveiling what Allah opens up for us of spiritual meanings and the realities of faith. Right? That's what he وَذَلِكَ لِلْقُلُوبِ وَالْأَسْرَارِ, and that's for one's hearts and one's innermost. Right? And he says وَهَذَا أَشْرَفُ الرِّزْقَيْنِ, and this is the more noble of the two provisions. فَإِنَّ ثَمَرَتَهُ حَيَاةُ الْأَبَدِ, because its fruit, its consequence is eternal life. Right? It's eternal life. Whereas the outward provision, its consequence is this worldly life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says Imam Ghazali, has taken care to create both types of provision. Right? And He is the one who conveys it to them. He conveys both outward provision and spiritual provision as well. But He expands provision. وَلَكِنَّهُ يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. He expands provision for whomever He wills. وَيَقْدِرُ. And He constrains it for whomever He wills. So He says that He divides it into two types. Imam Zarruq says that the sustaining, that is provision, that is rizq, and Allah is Al-Razzaq, the provider, is of four types. Right? That provision is of four types. There is the provision of bodies, right, by the food and drink that He sustains us with, right, by nourishment. And then there is the sustenance of intellects, right, through knowledge. Right? Knowledge is what sustains intellects. And He also sustains hearts through, وَالْقُلُوبِ بِالْفُهُومِ, by understandings. Right? Because the mind knows things. And the mind, the aql, the mind, the intellect, distinguishes between things. But it's the heart that understands. Right? The heart is what understands. Right? And by the heart, we're not talking about the physical heart, but the seat of our consciousness. And it is Allah who grants that. And there's a sustenance of souls, right? وَالْأَرْوَاحِ بِالتَّجَلِّيَاتِ, by Allah manifesting Himself and manifesting the meanings of faith in the heart of the one who turns to Him. Right? So that provision is at every level, at the level of the body, the mind, the heart, the soul. Okay. And here Imam Zarruq expands this meaning, right? That this provision, begins with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating. But then that provision continues with not just with Allah both sustaining things and providing all that things are sustained through, which is all these levels of provision. So this is how we understand the divine name Al-Razzaq. Then how does one characterize oneself? Right? Like what share does one have of the meanings of this name Al-Razzaq? Imam Al-Ghazali says that there's two aspects to this. The first is for one to know that the reality of this quality of providing belongs only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Razzaq hu Allah. That the provider is Allah and none other. Right? So one is not expectant of nor awaiting provision from any other. Right? And one does not trust in other than Him. and one does not trust in other than him. And he says it's like what is related from Hatim al-Asam, that a man asked him, Min ayna ta'kul? Where do you eat from? Like, how do you sustain yourself? And because most people are stuck in the world of means, right? They don't just take the means, but they're stuck in them. And Hatim seemed to be completely disconnected with the world of means. So how do you support yourself? I mean, ayna ta'kul? He said, min khaza'inihi, from Allah's treasures. So the man said, like, are you crazy? Right? So the man asked, Ayulqa alayka al-khubz min as-sama'? Is bread thrown to you from the sky? And Hatim said to the man that if the earth wasn't his, he would have sent it down from the sky. And had the earth not been his, he would have sent it down from the sky. So the man said, he still didn't get it, right? And Hatim simply explained that the reality is that everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever the means that you do take, you take them not seeking the provision from that means that you take, but you take the means seeking from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that's the adab of seeking one's livelihood. Right? That one takes those means, one seeks by those means from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course that's what holds so many people down in life, right? That they're stuck in the world of means and they don't realize the reality of the giver being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the first aspect of characterizing oneself by the meanings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being Al-Razzaq. That in one seeking, one is seeking from Allah. And in one seeking, one is trusting in Allah mighty and majestic. Right? And this is the spiritual reality of taqwa. Right? وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Whoever has taqwa of Allah, Allah will grant for them ways out in everything that they do. Right? And this is both a taqwa in one's practice, right, which is to guard oneself from that which is displeasing to Allah, but also taqwa in one's iman, that one guards one's iman from having the delusion of anything benefiting or harming one, assisting one, or giving to one besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. The ittiqa here is through the taqwa, the mindfulness is mindful conduct, but also mindfulness of faith. That one, because one guards oneself from one's iman having delusion in it. The delusion of anything besides Allah providing any benefit or harm to us. And people, until one is realized in faith, people are living in delusion, right? Because they see things as benefiting and harming, right? Which is why one of the great treatises in spirituality is the Risala of Wali Raslan of Damascus. He was one of the famous awliya of Damascus. And any true Damascus knows about Wali Raslan, at least knows that he is there and they know where he's buried. He has this treatise, he has a Risala fi Tawheed. It begins, Kulluka shirkun khafi. All of you is hidden shirk. Right? And you will not attain Tawheed until you divest yourself from that delusion of created things benefiting and harming you, right? And this is a meaning that many have warned about, right? That the whole point, the spiritual path is about ridding oneself of delusion, right? The delusion of you having any consequence, or the delusion of anything else benefiting you or harming you in any way. And so one trusts neither oneself nor anything else. One trusts Allah. وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Whoever places their trust in Allah, Allah is their sufficiency. And very often in our decision making, when we make decisions, we make disadvantageous and deludedly safe choices, imagining that that will be safer. Not realizing that the only source of safety is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is do you not believe the promise that whoever places their trust in Allah, وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. Allah is their sufficiency. Right? And this is from knowing that Allah is the provider. That's one aspect of characterizing oneself with the meaning of Allah being the provider. Right? The other aspect of characterizing oneself with the meanings of this divine attribute of Allah being Al-Razzaq is that one strives to seek beneficial provision, right, that one can then provide to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. What is that beneficial provision? Imam Ghazali says that one seek for Allah to provide for one knowledge whereby one can guide Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, a tongue by which one can give them right guidance, a hand by which one can give people charity, right? And to be the means of good provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaching the hearts of people through one's words, through one's conduct, through one's states, right? And in general, for one to seek good provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that one can give to others, both worldly provision, right, and spiritual provision, which is more consequential. But even worldly provision, this relates to our work, that in seeking provision from work, one of the aspects, one of the intentions in it, is that one seeking that provision from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to provide to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Okay? Firstly, oneself, because it's an obligation. You have an obligation to take care of yourself. If the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ibda binafsika, thumma man ta'ul," then those who are dependent upon you, one provides for them, right? So one seeks provision with the intention of characterizing oneself with the name of being Al-Razzaq, that you're providing for yourself. You're providing for those who are dependent upon you, providing for those who are in need, providing for those who would benefit. Right? None of you believes until they wish for others as they wish for themselves. You seek from the bounty of Allah, and you seek to spread Allah's bounty amongst His creation. And the same thing applies to your job. Most people just go through the motion. I'm just doing this job for some other reason, right? No, but the job itself, whatever you're doing that is halal, is a means of providing some benefit, actual or potential, to His creation. Right? Let's say you make, digital tablets. You came up with some alternative to Apple's iPad. Right? So you make, let's say after the revolution in Syria, you set up a factory outside Damascus and you make Shamtab. Right? And it's a multilingual tablet. So now the Shamtab, you say, well, I'm just doing this so I can sustain myself and be able to do the good in life. That's good, but you forgot what the job that you're doing yourself, it is from the rizq of Allah, and it could potentially be benefiting other people. Now you do it with the intention that people benefit from it, that they use it in ways for their worldly and eternal good. If they don't, That's not you're rewarded for your intention. Right? And any work that you do that is halal is by definition of actual or potential benefit for others. So one intends that. And so one doesn't just say, oh, I'm just seeking money from this, right? But one's seeking to be a manifestation of someone who provides good and benefit. Right? So that's one of the meanings here as well. Right? Then how does one draw close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are the meanings of taqarrub, of drawing closer to Allah through this name? Al-Razzaq, the provider. Imam Zarruq summarizes it very beautifully. He says, rahimahullah, that مَنْ عَرَفَ أَنَّهُ الرَّزَّاقُ, whoever knows that Allah is the provider, لَمْ يَهْتَمَّ بِرِزْقِهِ, they're not concerned with their provision. Meaning that they're concerned, that they're not fearful of their provision. Right? They don't have this fear that, oh my goodness, how will I be able to sustain myself? They're not worried that that if I do the right thing, will I be able to have a provision? And that's from one of the delusions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Qur'an that there is no creature on earth or in the sky إِلَّا وَعَلَيْنَا رِزْقُهَا, except that it is upon us to provide for it. Because that's the reality. He is the sole provider. Right? And you don't see birds just falling off the sky without, I ran out of food. Right? And if you look at the world, even people who are hungry, they're still living. Right? They're still living. So why not make your primary concern higher than just getting by? Like, what is the difference between you and an animal? If all your concern is to get by and be comfortable in this dunya. That's what animals do. They graze all day and then they go to sleep somewhere and they try to make themselves comfortable as best they can. That's what animals do. They eat, drink, procreate, and sleep. Right? In the meantime, they entertain themselves in whatever way. But the reality is that one should have a higher aim. Right? That one does not just seek to get by in this dunya, but one seeks Allah and one seeks the good. Right? To be able to be a person who attains the good themselves and who can provide the good to others. Right? That is how one draws close. And that's what keeps one from that is hammul rizq. Right? Is the worry of one's provision. Many people, for example, Allah gives them an opening that they could study. Right? They have a teacher that they can benefit from, and they could study. And they have a job. Say, no, I can't right now because I need to get this certification and do this and do this and do this. And they don't, as a result, benefit in their deen. And the reality is that actually, if you look at their life, they do have the time. Right? They could do both things. They could seek that material advancement that they're seeking, but if they had a higher concern, they were not just worried about provision, they'd make the most of their time and attain both benefits. Right? So they would seek their personal advancement, but they would also seek to pursue their eternal benefit as well. Right? But the concern for rizq holds them back. Right? And rather, one seeks provision, seeking it by Allah and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for His pleasure. Right? And also, Imam Zarruq says, وَلَمْ يَتَوَجَّهْ فِيهِ لِأَحَدٍ مِّنْ خَلْقِهِ, and one does not seek provision from any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, in that one does not see that they are one's benefactor, that they're the one who will give or take. Right? ثقة بما أعد له مولاه من رزقه, with confidence in what Allah has prepared for them of provision. Right? And وسكونا لجميل وصفه, and out of a sense of rest of Allah's beautiful quality, that He is Al-Razzaq. Do you doubt Allah's quality of being Al-Razzaq? Right? And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Hadith Qudsi, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِي بِي, I am as my servant thinks of me. Right? And then in drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Imam Zarruq says that part of what enables us to draw closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by this name is that one withholds one's nafs from being fearful or worried with respect to one's provision, right? And not to be shaken in poverty or lack of means, right? Rather, both in plenty, one sees that the giver is Allah, and in poverty, one sees that the giver is Allah, and this is what He's given us right now. وَسَلُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ, and ask Allah of His bounty. And this is one of the things that causes people to be weak in their poverty is the excessive worrying that takes them over. And just yesterday I was listening on NPR, a lot of people who don't have a job don't actually look for a job. Why? Because they get so stressed and so worried about, will I get a job? Will I do well in the interview? Will this happen? Will they accept my qualifications? That they get so nervous about it because they see benefit and harm from creation that they're not actually able to seek their worldly benefit. Whereas the one who knows that Allah is the Razzaq has complete peace of mind that the one who benefits and harms is Allah. Creation are just means. So one takes the means in the best of ways without any worry, without any hesitation. You go to the interview, you're not worried whether they'll have a good or bad impression of you. You just take the means in the best of ways. You don't see them as benefiting or harming in any way. So you don't have the belief. The one who has trust in Allah does not have stress or nervousness with respect to creation. It doesn't matter to them whether it is 2 people that they're speaking in front of or 2,000 or 20,000. Doesn't matter. Because their mu'amalah, their dealing is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And any benefit that they're seeking in whatever they're pursuing is from Allah, mighty and majestic. Right? And this is what, with complete rest regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise that Inna Allah huwa Razzaq, that verily Allah is the all-providing. Right? Inna Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just say Allahu Razzaq. Allah is the provider. Translated literally here, it will be, verily, it is Allah who is the provider. Which sounds wordy in English, but the meaning here is that verily it is Allah who is the provider. Meaning that La Raziqa siwahu, that there is no provider but Him. Dhul Quwwatil Mateen, the sole possessor of power and strength. And this recognizing Allah as being the Razzaq, both the provider of both material and spiritual sustenance, makes one realize aspects of the meaning of La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no ability nor power except through Allah. That there is no ability to seek your benefit nor to attain your benefit except through Allah, the provider, the powerful, the strong. None other provides, none other has power nor strength to benefit nor harm in any way whatsoever. So that's a little of what we can mention about the divine name Al-Razzaq. And we'll close by some words of Imam Al-Qushayri rahimahullah, who talks about rizq al-arwahi wal-asrar, the provision of souls and the innermost, right? The sir. And the sir is not the secret within you in the sense that it's something that no one should know about. The sir is ma ما يخفى عن الناس. It was hidden from people, right? And certain types of knowledge are referred to as being sir, not that it's some kind of dark secret, like you have to join the club and pay your membership and then we'll tell you about it. But rather that it's hidden from most people. Most people don't know about it. لا يعلمه كثير من الناس, right? So he mentions that that a man used to serve Sahl ibn Abdullah al-Tustari. And this man, who was one of the great imams of the spiritual path, and he became hungry. This man became hungry. So he went to Sahl and said, Ya Ustad al-Qut, my dear teacher, the sustenance. Right? So Sahl said to him, he said to Sahl, Ya Ustad al-Qut. فقال سهل الله الحي الذي لا يموت. He asked sustenance. So Sahl said, Allah is the living who does not die. So after a while, the man was even hungrier. So he said, Ya Ustad al-Qut, oh teacher, the food. So Sahl said, لا بد من الله الحي الذي لا يموت. He said there's absolute need for Allah, who's the living and does not die. And of course, presumably afterwards, he gave him the food. But meaning that he was teaching him, right? That, we feel neediness for created things, right? We feel the neediness for created things. You're hungry, you feel you need food. But the lesson that Sahl was teaching was, how much need do you feel for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? That you're hungry, so it's okay, I'm seeking the food. But when you're hungry, if you break down what hunger is, it's need. And the hunger is a need. You seek it not just by seeking food, but you seek to fulfill your hunger from the food. But the reality is that both in your seeking the food itself, you should be seeking the food from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But also that what you should be seeking is not just these material things, but you should feel the neediness for Allah more than you feel the neediness for food and the like. So the man, he deliberately didn't give him food. The man said, where's the food? He said, Allah is the living who doesn't die. Right? You feel more need for Allah than for created things. Right? And one of the early spiritual masters was asked, what is sustenance? Right? What is sustenance? Right? And qut, right, is that which sustains you. Right? So he said, ذِكْرُ الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. It's the remembrance of the living who does not die. Right? And that is the rizq. Right? How do you seek the sustenance of hearts and souls? It is by remembering the sustainer, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And then Imam Qushayri mentions that a man entered upon Dawood al-Ta'i, one of the great imams of the Salaf, of the spiritual path. And Dawood al-Ta'i was really happy. Right? Though normally, he was, quite serious and, munqabid, like, constrained. So the man asked Dawood al-Ta'i, what made you like this? Why are you so happy? Right? So he said, yesterday Allah provided me of the drink of intimacy with Him, of uns. So today I decided to make this day a day of rejoicing, a day of Eid, right? That he experienced meanings of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and intimacy. So he wanted to make the next day a day of rejoicing. Right? So the man said, well, since he's rejoicing, and Dawud al-Ta'i was a zahid, he was a person of renunciation, he did without food and drink and so on. So the man said, أَتَأْذَنْ لِي أَنْ أَحْمِلَ إِلَيْكَ طَعَامًا حَتَّى تُفْطِرْ. Said, would you allow me to bring some food to you so you can break your fast? So Dawud al-Ta'i shook his head and says, لَسْتُ أُشِيرُ إِلَى هَذَا. This is not what I'm pointing to. Right? That I'm not talking about some drink that Allah gave me that is physical. Right? That provision, that gift that He gave me, that provision that He gave me, for which He was rejoicing today, was not a tangible provision. Right? It was a spiritual provision. Right? There's this meaning of closeness. He found a particular meaning of closeness and intimacy with Allah. So the appropriate response to it was a rejoicing that was also not just an outward rejoicing. People are happy, say, okay, let's go have a meal, let's celebrate. It was an inward. The provision was inward and the celebration was inward as well. Because the man said, okay, let's get some food and let's celebrate. He said, that's it. Let's do هذا أشير. Right? And also, Imam Qushayri closes his chapter on the name Al-Razzaq, the provider, with a line of poetry that فَأَسْكَرَ الْقَوْمَ دُورُ كَأْسٍ وَكَانَ سُكْرِي مِنَ الْمُدِيرِ. Right? And of course this is a metaphor, because the poets talk about love and lovers. And normally, what happens in love? Right? And this is talk about worldly love. Normally, the case would be that love is unrequited. You love the beloved, but the beloved turned away. So if the beloved turns away, what do you do? And we're talking about worldly love, not what you should do as a believer. Worldly love, you're sad. Where do sad lovers go? Where do the sad lovers go? Right? They go to the tavern. Right? And how do they try to forget their sadness? By drinking. Right? And that gives them joy, because then they forget the reality of their distance from their beloved, and in their intoxication they can start imagining their beloved. Right? They say, if distance separates me from my beloved, drink stirs my imagination to remember them. Right? So they fall in love with the one who gave them that drink. Because the one who gave them the drink helped them remember the beloved in a good way. Because the beloved's far away. But that's of course a metaphor for the worldly love. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala it's different. Right? In that if you turn to Allah, it's not that He turns to you. If you turn to Him, you only turn to Him because He turned to you in eternity. يُحِبُّهُمْ وَيُحِبُّونَ. He loves them. Like He provides for you of those spiritual meanings before you ask for it. Right? From eternity. But this poet said that the people were drunk when the cups of wine were spread amongst them. But my being drunk was from the one who was giving the wine. Right? Pointing to the fact that the people rejoice in the material provision. But the true lover rejoices in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The true lover, their rejoicing is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا. Say, in the bounty of Allah and in His mercy, in that let them rejoice. هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. It is better than all that they gather. It is better than all that they gather. And and that relates to both material provision, that what do you rejoice in when provided for? You rejoice in the provider above the provision, right? The true believer puts first things first. Allah comes first, the provider comes first, then His providing, then the provision. Right? And that's part of knowing that it is Allah who provides all these matters, right? And in rejoicing, even in our spiritual life, we rejoice not in what is given to us, because that is selfish rejoicing, but we rejoice in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same thing in love, right? One seeks love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not selfishly. Imam Dardir in his book on the adab of the seekers mentioned this line of poetry: أحبك لا لي بل لأنك أهله وما لي في شيء سواك مطامع. I love you not for myself, but because you are deserving of it, and I have in nothing besides you avidness. Right? And when we seek from the bounty of Allah, we're seeking because it is Allah who is the possessor of bounty, the provider of bounty. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us insight and to realize something of the meanings of Al-Razzaq, the provider of all things, both material and spiritual, and to seek by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet said, Sallallahu min fadli. Ask Allah min fadlihi, from His bounty. Right? So you're asking Allah, you're seeking from Him, from His bounty. Right? And part of that is that one's asking is not a demand, but rather it is ubudiyya. It is slavehood and expression of one's need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.